Let's get this thing going. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, for folks on the West Coast. I'm Corrie Emerson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Communications Director at Verified Voting. Really looking forward to moderating this really great, timely conversation with my verified voting colleagues and our friends at All Voting is Local. We're just about 12 months from the midterm elections, and early voting has already started in many important elections that are on the ballot this fall. We're here today to share what our organizations are doing to prepare for the upcoming elections, how partnerships like ours in the pro-democracy space are simply just so important right now, and give you folks that are tuning in today some actions that you can take as a voter, as an engaged citizen to protect your vote. Excuse me. Before we get to all the good stuff, some housekeeping items up top. If you are a member of the media in any capacity, this webinar is off the record. Feel free to contact Verified Voting, myself, or All Voting is Local afterwards for a one-on-one conversation. We'll have our contact information in the follow-up email. This event is being recorded and it might be shared externally. My colleague Sunchana will be sharing some helpful links in the chat as we go along, so make sure you have the chat up and ready. Captions are enabled. If you'd like to turn them on for yourself, find the CC button on Zoom. Questions. We have received some questions ahead of time, so thank you to folks who have already submitted them. But we have a Q&A box here in the Zoom platform, and we really welcome questions as we go through our program. So I encourage you to put them in the Q&A box and also include your name if you can and if you feel comfortable, just because if we don't have time to answer your question, have a way to reach out to you afterwards. And again, everyone will be getting a follow-up email after. But for now, let me introduce our wonderful panelists. First, we have Ashia Brown. Ashia is the Michigan State Director for All Voting is Local, where she leads statewide efforts to expand ballot access, protect vote certification, and counter election sabotage. Under her leadership, the Michigan team earned the 2024 Advocate of the Year Award for advancing voting rights and implementing Proposal 2, which expanded early voting and mail-in ballot access. She previously served as the first election security specialist for the Michigan Department of State, coordinating the state's election security plan with federal and local partners. We have Debbie Lombardi, who is All Voting is Local's Director of National Campaigns and Programs. Debbie has been working in voter engagement and voting rights since 2012. Prior to All Voting is Local, she served as the Director of Election Administration for Democracy Works, coordinating the Voting Information Project. Prior to that, she ran National Voter Registration Day, yay, engaging thousands of nonprofit, corporate, university, and other partners in this civic holiday. She also worked with Fair Election Center's Campus Vote Project and the Forward Montana Foundation. Pivoting to another Montanan, we have Megan Meyer, Verified Voting's Deputy Director of Research and Partnerships. Megan builds relationships with partner organizations, election administrators, and other stakeholders in the pro-democracy space. She represents Verified Voting on the Election Protection Coalition Steering Committee, organizes the preparation for and rapid response to voting equipment issues during the voting period. And in her role, she also creates and shares so many data-rich resources with our partners, journalists, researchers, and others to support their work. And finally, we have Pamela Smith, the president and CEO of Verified Voting. Pam plays a national leadership role in safeguarding elections, advocating for secure and fair voting processes, and building working alliances between advocates, election officials, and other stakeholders. She's a nationally recognized expert on election security for over 20 years and authors, contributes to, and frequently speaks on matters about election security, administration, disinformation, and voting technology. Pam is also a member of the National Task Force on Election Crises, which is a diverse, cross-partisan group of more than 50 experts. So we have a lot of expertise in the room here today, and we also have a lot of new folks tuning in. So I'd love to start with each organization just giving a quick snapshot of exactly what it is we do. And I'm going to start with Pam.
Okay, I will try and be quick. So Verified Voting's mission is to strengthen democracy for all voters by promoting the responsible use of technology in elections. And we envision that all voters can cast an effective ballot without barriers, that voters can have justified confidence that their votes were counted as cast, and that ultimately foundational democratic principles are upheld. We do this with research, advocacy, communications, direct support, and engagements across the field of electoral democracy. So we work on making sure policies support strong infrastructure and guardrails in elections so that elections are resilient to the kinds of things that can and will go wrong, so that voting can continue, so that we're able to demonstrate to the public that the election was right. It's making sure that there's evidence that will stand up in court, because there will be court. And we're not the litigators, but what we've been working on for more than 20 years is making sure the necessary evidence is available to prove voter intent. So getting election technology that enables voters rather than disenfranchises them, making sure they can register, check in, and their vote is captured in a way that provides that evidence, and that election officials can check results with a strong audit and explain them to the public. We support election officials in policies and practices, especially around audits, but also all the things that go along with keeping elections resilient. Developing working relationships that help us help them better, advocate for funding and resources for them to be able to be safe and continue to do their work. And this year we've had lobbyists on the ground in about a dozen states and supported other audits in still other states as well. So that could look like, for example, working with lawmakers in Texas as they consider what legislation to bring in the even numbered year, and making sure that they're continuing to be able to do risk limiting audit pilots. Working with the State Board of Elections in Virginia, providing expertise for their audit procedures and looking to fix a loophole in the statute in the coming legislative session that prevents certain contests from being audited. Engaging with county recorders in Arizona, getting them and lawmakers interested in doing risk limiting audit pilots, supporting publication of the data from audits in Pennsylvania, and continuing to pursue a bill there for a stronger audit. Working with the state of South Carolina to plan for risk limiting audit pilots and training. There's so many different things. Those are just a few. If I didn't mention your state, we may be working on improvements there too. Reach out. So we collect and make publicly available information about all the technology being used in every jurisdiction in the country, not just because we're data nerds, which we are, but also because the stories behind the data are meaningful. It's informing the press, it's informing voters and researchers and educators and other advocates and policymakers, and maintaining that open connection to election officials. We support voters with our public information and explainers, but also with election protection, making sure voters can vote in real time, but also supporting all the planning that goes into that. So our work essentially is safeguard the processes and procedures, safeguard the voter, safeguard the people who carry out elections, and safeguard the vote. And making sure these fundamentals are working and available, I think, is more important than ever this coming election cycle. We've been doing this for a long time. We say that often, but I think I can safely say this may be the most important election of our lives.
Thanks, Pam. Debbie, will you tell us more about All Voting is Local?
Yeah, I'm happy to. First, thank you so much for having us join your webinar. We're excited to be working with you and to participate in this. And for those of you that don't know, All Voting is Local is a nonpartisan organization that fights on the ground in 8 states for free and fair elections. In a moment of continuous threats to our democracy, our team advocates for voters and supports state and local officials in adopting policies and practices that ensure the American people choose their leader and not the other way around. Year-round, we work with our partners to prevent partisan interference in our elections, advance fair and inclusive rules on voter registration, and remove barriers that make it more difficult for people to vote, particularly for Black, Brown, Native American, and other historically marginalized communities. As a multi-state organization with a national presence and resources, we foster connections between state and national advocacy groups, ensuring that local voices and perspectives inform the national conversation on voter access. We're on the ground in 8 states, including Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. The core of our work is in the states, which is why I'm excited to be joined today by my colleague Ashia, who runs our Michigan program. And during the 2024 cycle, our programs expanded access for more than 13 million voters.
Amazing. So my first question is, I've heard both of you mention democracy, democracy a few times. So what does that mean to be in the pro-democracy field? Why is that so important to be in this field and to have partners like Verified Voting and All Voting is Local working together? Pam, I'll start with you.
So I think a lot of us are feeling that American democracy is being tested on many fronts as we approach our 250th as a country. And these fronts are often connected and overlapping. Funding and resource cuts at the federal level include cuts to election support, challenges to free speech, to the philanthropic community, to nonprofit organizations. These are things that can affect the ability to carry out our work to support free and fair elections. And today's electoral democracy faces threats that are both old and new. For most of this year, honestly, the federal government's been undermining the ability of states to safely run elections. Funding and tools have been eliminated, information sharing and analysis gutted, and task forces that support the safety of those who run elections stood down. And while it's true that elections have been chronically underfunded and under-resourced for many years, the burden is now shifted to state and local governments even more than before. But elections are the way we decide our leaders and those who we expect to govern on our behalf. And on that front, the threats are both actual and looming and require that we look at all the possibilities and eventualities and plan so that no matter what, we can have free and fair elections. And everyone has a role to play in making the guardrails of our democracy strong enough to withstand disinformation, federal overreach, software breaches or malfunctions, and anything else these times throw at us. And I think election resilience in the states is vital now. It's more important than ever to be able to correct anything that might go wrong with election systems and to provide stronger assurance against uncertainty. Above all, I think being in the pro-democracy field means working with everyday heroes like those who serve in the election space and working with other like-minded people who believe hope is a muscle we have to exercise and there is no try, there is only do. So the first thing about partnering with other organizations is we make each other smarter. A smart person reminded me the other day of the importance of having both an offense and a defense and even special teams since it's football season to safeguard elections. And that resonated with me. Every organization has its particular strengths, and it's important to harmonize those and deploy them all. Working with All Voting is Local is essential. In some key states, they have local knowledge acquired through their focused work that informs how we determine what steps we might need to take, for example, to get a bill through. And while we have overlap with some of their 8 states, we're in other states where that perspective might help them and it might help others. So it's going to take all of us. And with all of us, not just democracy-focused organizations, but also election officials and policymakers and funders and voters working together, we've got a shot at free and fair elections. And we certainly don't have a shot if everything is siloed and separate, or if we wear ourselves out with redundant efforts when we could be covering the gaps. So our strength comes from 20 years focusing on how technology impacts voting and voters. That enables another organization with legal chops to do their thing, but informed by those key pieces of information. So I think those are some of the reasons why it's so important to work together.
Debbie, I mean, we invited you here today. What do you think? What speaks to you about partnering with other folks in the pro-democracy space? I had the great fortune of meeting a lot of folks at All Voting is Local in DC last week. It was just really great to have folks all in the same room together. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I'm glad you got to meet so many of us. I think I'm going to start with like a little bit of a story of how a partnership works to be really effective. First, we're thankful to count verified voting among our partners and to be in coalition with them. Your technical expertise is critical as we navigate nuanced attacks on our elections alongside the larger outlandish claims that we're seeing. A recent example is our partnership with 6 other organizations, including Verified Voting, in pushing back on the Election Assistance Commission, also known as the EAC's, attempt to implement part of the March executive order on elections. In June, the groups coordinated a response to the EAC's consideration of implementing the executive order in their technical voting machine guidelines. On July 2nd, a committee of the EAC held a meeting on changing those guidelines in accordance with the executive order on elections. We were able to drive public comment, urging the EAC not to amend the guidelines at this time, as amending the guidelines should be driven by the needs of election officials and voters. This resulted in 424 public comments submitted by organizations, election officials, and members of the public for a meeting that often has little to no public engagement because it's kind of a very technical, nuanced space. The volume of public comments and the arguments made became a central aspect of the meeting and helped guide the committee working on it alongside throughout the process. I think this is just one example of how partnerships have bolstered our work and the work of other organizations. As Pam touched on, being in the pro-democracy space means understanding the unique value adds of each organization and how we can utilize and uplift each other's strengths to make meaningful advances for voters, I think is the big thing, right? We're all in alignment on making advances for voters, and by working together, we can bolster and strengthen what each of us is really good at and help uplift each other.
And Megan, since you're our partnerships expert with all of the data and all of the resources, can you give an example or two of from your own experience about how we help partners utilize our tools?
Yes, and I don't want to sheepy Debbie or even Pam, who have already talked a little bit about this, but so we have some great tools, which I know Sunshana will be sharing in the chat. One of them is the Verifier, which has information on election technology and audits as well. In elections going back, the technology, we go back to 2006, so folks can see changes over time. And so, in addition to that, we also track election officials, and so it's possible to see changes in turnover. And so, our partners, All Voting is Local, and others can use that data, and we can also share with more context and sometimes data sets in a way that is just tailored for the particular organization or even just state. So one of my favorite things to do is to put together just a state briefing for like a state coalition. The folks in Michigan, for example, or what we have done in the past. Actually, that's a pitch. And what we've done in the past is work with folks in Ohio, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida. We are going to talk with Michigan, I know. And just shared things like this is a list of all the counties that have new equipment. That will be used for the first time in this upcoming election in your state. And here's a list of new election officials. And of course, that doesn't mean it's their first time running an election, but just a new person to do outreach to, ahead of time to talk about what the plan is when things go wrong, because of course, things happen. And we also get to partner with folks in the space who are doing advocacy work against like the expansion of internet voting. And then I also really enjoy supporting the work of academics. So sometimes we work with grad students or professors at universities who are doing research on something that's really particular, but we happen to have this data because we've been tracking it for 20 years. And so we can share that with them and they can really get into the details and use it in really interesting ways. So it's not just sharing the information we have, but sharing it with folks who are going to use it in different ways and maybe in their own work or just to make their work easier. Like we love working with state folks because we get to provide information that we already have and they can use it in their own work that they're already doing and they know so well in their own communities. And maybe it's just a lift that they don't have to do on their own.
Those are really great examples. Let's pivot a little bit. I think we've really covered how our work really intersects with each other, but there's a lot going on in the world right now, right? There's a lot happening in the news. I think I just got like 7 news alerts about various things happening in the universe, right? So voters are trying to navigate through all of this noise that we're all experiencing. Ashia, this is for you. What kinds of information should voters specifically be looking for and paying attention to right now?
Thanks. That's a really good question. Like you said, we get news alerts all day. I had to actually cancel some of my news alerts off of my phone, turn my notifications off because it got really bad this year. But right now, voters and us, we're all being flooded with so much noise and mis and disinformation, and even some well-intentioned confusion about how elections work. And at the same time, we have our election administrators, like our local clerks, who actually make democracy function that are under even more pressure than ever. So they need support, but also some of them are giving out incorrect information just because they don't have proper sources. So when it comes to trying to cut through the noise, I think the key is to focus on credible local and official sources. Going straight to your local or county clerk's office is extremely important. Secretary of State's websites are supposed to be accurate and up to date, so that is a very good trusted source. I like to tell voters and remind them to always remain skeptical of screenshots and social media posts or even viral claims that don't cite official sources or like link back to a government site. Um, Voters should also look for transparency. We have some really, really awesome clerks in Michigan. Our Ottawa County clerk, for example, Justin Roebuck, he is amazing at this, at providing transparency for his community. For things that individuals don't understand, he makes sure that he lays it out clearly. So the election process, he plays it out completely on his social media pages. He is there. He brings in real life election workers and he lays out the process on election day, what it looks like down to closing down the polls, and having that much transparency and letting people actually see the process and how a bipartisan, how we have in Michigan, we have individuals from both parties as part of the process the entire way. When people see that, it helps get through a lot of that noise and builds a lot of trust with them because once you know the process, you can then trust the process. If you don't know it, then it's so easy for you to get confused or being taken back by mis and disinformation that you might see on the web. So that's extremely important. Um, I'd say also, to get through the noise, something that we do at All Voting is Local. We had a huge campaign last year that was a voter aid campaign, but we did it in a different way. It was a huge nonpartisan voter education campaign called our My Voted campaign. And the goal was, because Michigan recently passed Proposition 2, which was in Michigan expanding all the ways you can vote. We can vote now, up to with a minimum of 9 days early. You can vote by drop box. You can vote absentee. You can vote at early voting sites in Michigan. But this confused individuals if you lived in the state. A lot of people didn't know this information, didn't know when the laws went into effect. They were confused about what their specific options were and what they were eligible for. So we wanted to run a campaign. And again, we go back to those trusted sources. So we worked with our Secretary of State's office. We got local clerks on board. And we ran a campaign using trusted sources and providing voter education to make sure that the communities here understood their new available options to get rid of some of the confusion. And then it also got rid of some of there's lots of mis and disinformation currently in our community. You have a Secretary of State race coming up. So, of course, there's some tension and some mis and disinformation that takes place from a number of the candidates. That got rid of a lot of the mis and disinformation that we were seeing just because, again, we partied the trusted sources with a lot of information, and then we made sure to keep it nonpartisan. And that's a good way of making sure that you can kind of get through all the noise and get the voters directly to the information that they need without any specific bias.
That's really helpful. In addition to all of the mis and disinformation and these information silos that we're all, operating within, this is for, I think, Pam, Debbie, Shia, anyone, Megan, what concerns you the most right now about election administration generally, from, the federal government to why, emphasizing why state and local work is suddenly becoming, not suddenly, but it is becoming even more important than, it used to be, because there's this lack of resources being deployed by the federal government, and just, a lot of disinformation out there. Can you talk a little bit about what concerns you the most? I'll start with Pam.
First of all, I want to plus one to what my colleagues were saying, and particularly about getting credible local information. As she has said, the rules vary from state to state. Even equipment might be different from one county to the next. Um, so be proactive, I think, for voters to find out what's going on. We did some research about elections with voters and found that a lot of them, maybe most of them, have little knowledge about what happens to their ballot once they vote. And that's completely understandable, no shade, but the more information you can have about elections, the better you can understand how things work. And so we urge people to participate and observe, check in with local election officials for that info. Great info like Ashia was talking about in Michigan, but also, walkthroughs, ride-alongs for voters, see what happens. Election officials pretty much always make pre-election testing of equipment public, and in most cases, you can observe things like audits taking place. And just being aware of the fact that audits exist is an important thing. We hear folks wanting to hand count ballots on election night because they're concerned about voting machines, but the better solution is doing an initial count with actually very fast technology and then check the count with a really robust audit, like a risk limiting audit, to make sure it was right. I think some of the things I'm concerned about, certainly funding is not sufficient. Um, Election Infrastructure Advocacy Day just happened in DC with like 80 election officials from 26 states advocating for putting back the kind of federal funding that's needed to support infrastructure and security. And consistent funding enables election officials to do long-term planning and have all the things they need to keep elections secure. But without that, it's all landing on the shoulders of state and local jurisdictions. And so they need all the help they can get. I would say advocate for funding for your local election official, advocate for funding for the state, volunteer to be a poll worker. That helps them. And I've talked a lot about audits, and it's good that we have some, but they really need to be stronger in many places. So, no voting system is trustworthy just by itself. The way you secure voting systems broadly is by protecting them from unlawful access, like people who should not have access to them, and by checking them before every election to make sure that they're properly programmed for that election and functioning, and by checking them after every election to make sure they counted correctly. And if they didn't, to be able to correct that. And so we recently published an op-ed in Democracy Docket about the importance of this chain of custody of election critical equipment and to support election officials rejecting inappropriate demands for access to the technology. These kinds of breaches have occurred in several states since 2020, and that increases the urgency of getting really good chain of custody rules everywhere and conducting really solid audits. And so I think the help of people in supporting strong audits is needed. That's a key thing that we work for. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it's essential. And it doesn't happen at the federal level with a sweeping bill that says everyone will do risk limiting audits, the strongest kinds of audits, before elections are certified, transparent and observable. It happens at the state level, one by one, right? Maybe even county by county, starting off with pilots sometimes. And that's why state and local work is just so critically important. Um, I think also one other thing to add is that uh, results take time. And not only do they take time for all the ballots to be counted, but nationally, we've kind of got this mindset that it risks overlooking one of the most important things, which is checking the results to make sure they're right. It's like we got the results, and election officials are still working on the audit to prove the results, and that's an important thing. So, we have this idea that if we don't have a count at 8:01, or if it changes at 10 o'clock or at midnight, that's somehow problematic. No, results take time, and that's okay. Election night is not results night in most places. It's not final results, and that's okay. And so we continue to participate in campaigns that really push forward the need for patience, because we want it right. And you can have it fast, you can have it cheap, you can have it right. Pick any two. You can't have all three. So those are some key things I think we worry about.
Debbie, how about all voting is local? What's on your minds?
Yeah, I'm glad you called on me because I was like gearing up to jump in and share some of the things we're thinking about.
Probably a
Um,
lot.
yeah, yeah, there is a lot. And so I kind of wanted to like focus on one of the things we're thinking about, which is we've been very closely monitoring attacks on voter registration as a direct result of overreach. One example of those threats is the call for documentary proof of citizenship. Calls for documentary proof of citizenship or DPOC are unnecessary and they perpetuate lies about immigrants and voting to sow doubt about our elections as part of a broader strategy to distract us from issues that are facing our families and our communities. Requiring DPOC could potentially impact tens of millions of voters nationwide, most of those voters being women, Black or Brown, youth, and or low income. We've seen this push on the national level through the SAVE Act, and we've seen it on the state level through state-based copycat bills. We've also seen it through the executive order on preserving and protecting the integrity of American elections that came out in March, and through other means. According to a study from Brennan Center, PublicWise, and VoteWriters, around 21.3 million Americans don't readily have citizenship documents available, which points more towards how many people would be impacted if this was implemented. On top of that, we've seen the DOJ has been requesting voter roll data from states, with at least 38 states having received a request from the DOJ, and they've sued 8 states so far that have not complied with the request, citing their state and federal laws as the reason for not complying to protect the privacy of the data. The federal government's unprecedented collection of state voter registration data poses major data security and privacy risks for voters and election administration. Relying on incompatible, unreliable, and or out-of-date federal databases to try and verify voters' eligibility risks disenfranchising voters. I think in this moment, voters' data privacy and the security and reliability of our voter registration records are paramount. And these are just two examples of the threats to elections we are seeing. Attempts to encourage or enforce hand counting, which is an unreliable method of tabulating ballots, attempts to limit voting to only election day, threats to the certification process, and limitations on vote by mail are all calls coming from the administration and other bad actors, such as the Election Integrity Network. And these calls are happening at the national, state, and local level. Ultimately, the impact they have will be on the state and local election officials who are running the day-to-day operations of elections. It's critical that we support election officials just trying to do their jobs in 2026 and beyond, and ensuring that they have the resources and the support that they need as there's increasing confusion as some of these calls are made.
Great. I'm going to pivot because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. But we do have elections coming up soon. So I want to turn to Megan quickly. Can you tell us a little bit about election protection and the hotline before we dive in a little bit more about what exactly voters themselves should be doing this election, aside from knowing about EP?
Yes, most definitely. So, the Election Protection Coalition is made up of more than 300 member organizations. And what we do is work to ensure that all voters can cast their ballots freely, fairly, and securely, and have those ballots counted. So, election protection empowers and supports communities that have been historically disenfranchised and underrepresented in democracy. And we do that by centering the work of state-based organizations. So that is kind of what I was talking about before, supporting states who know their communities and who are already working in their communities. And so election protection work is direct voter assistance, education, and also advocacy and litigation, and of course, election official outreach. So one of the big parts of election protection is the 866 Our Vote hotline. It's administered by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, and it is available year-round. Um, and there are volunteers who, you know, certain parts of the year are responding to voicemails or texts, but definitely in election season are answering the phone and actually answering voter questions. So something like, where is my polling place? Or how can I vote? Or when can I vote? Or, if I've been disenfranchised, can I still vote? And we also have, there's a process set up so that if a volunteer receives a call about something like a polling place that is unopened because none of the equipment is working, or voters are in line and most of the voting machines are not working and the lines are getting really long. This is where verified voting really comes in, and we run an election equipment support program. It's called eGeeks. And Pam could even tell you more about it because she's done it from the beginning. But in this last election, we had a really robust program. We worked with our partners at the Brennan Center and Common Cause to bring in just almost 30 people who were set up with state programs, and then also available for any other questions that came in. And if a volunteer gets a call and can't answer it, they escalate it, and it goes to the state, and then it comes to one of the e-geeks who can address it by either sharing some resources. We created quite a few resources, just like one pagers on all the most commonly used equipment. And there are tips on there about, how voters might try touching a touchscreen differently, or if it's something bigger going on, how an election official might need to recalibrate a machine, or just getting in contact with the people who need to know about what's going on, and then also connecting with our folks who do litigation. Like if there is a polling place that needs to stay open late because it didn't open on time because of that equipment issue. So there's a lot going on in election protection. It is open all year. And I definitely want folks to know that they can even call the hotline if they're monitoring or if they're a poll worker. It's not just for voters. It's for anyone who, sees or hears about, not hears about maybe, but sees something going on, or experiences something at the polling place that's causing issues, or just has a question. And this election, since you asked, we are running the program, the Election Equipment Support Program, not just in the states with the most major elections, but definitely there, but also in states like where I am in Montana, because all voters matter, and it's not just, of course, voters in places that have a governor's race, but we're there to support everybody.
So, in addition to this great resource for voters, Ashia, this is for you. As a voter myself, as somebody in my community, what are practical things that we can do, folks that are logged in here today can do to help safeguard our elections?
Or some practical things that everyday people can do, whether you're like working in policy, community organizing, or just somebody who votes in every election. I think first you can get involved at a local level. The best way to strengthen the trust is to see the process up close and personal, like get in there, get involved, see what's going on, ask the questions. Sign up and serve as a poll worker or an election inspector, especially in Michigan. Clerks across Michigan are like in desperate need of help. Many of them are short-staffed. Again, we have a minimum of 9 days early voting because of Proposal 2. So having people from the community come in and serve is great. It fills in staffing gaps, but also it builds transparency. And voters see that their neighbors are the ones running the elections, not like this faceless institution, and they become more trustworthy in the process. Second, you can help combat misinformation when you see or hear something that doesn't sound right. Like pause and verify that. Don't share it. Don't just share out like raw information without ensuring that it is correct and from a trusted source. You can check official sources. Ours, of course, is michigan.gov, but I'm sure every state has the same. You can check your local, either your local clerk's website or your Secretary of State's website, depending on how your elections are ran. And then find a way I find it's best to gently correct misinformation when it comes up in conversations or online, but make sure you get out there and put the sources. Like, we all could be a solution to the problem. People are far more likely to trust accurate information when it comes from somebody that they know and trust rather than like a random source. Third, I'd say support and thank your local clerks. Again, they have an enormous workload and burnout. For the last question about like administrators and the election administration process, what I was going to specifically say in Michigan, turnover is our like diabolical thing right now. Clerks are quitting left and right. Imagine if your pay stayed the same. But everything else changed in your role, right? So the workload changed, the days, the hours is operated, everything changed, but your pay basically stays the same. That doesn't work for a lot of our clerks, and a lot of them, the turnover is ridiculous, and it's really hard to keep them staffed. So that's a very big thing, burnout and people retiring, and especially people leaving without leaving the proper, having the proper changeover process. Like when one person leave and staff turnover, usually somebody comes into work on Wednesday and just like, I'm done. I'm done with it because the burnout is so real. So they don't have time to properly train the next person. So it's really, really good when we can build up those proper relationships and people don't quit because of burnout. So showing up for your clerks and saying thank you, showing them that they're appreciated just as someone in their community, that really goes a long way because they are facing burnout at a local level, but also they're being hit with stuff from a federal level with a lot of these or proof of citizenship, just the threat of it and what it could do for their jobs and the impact of the work that it will add on to them. That's stressful. So letting them know that they're appreciated and that every small act that they do is strengthening our system is really, really important. And then finally, just staying connected, follow trusted organizations like All Voting is Local and Verified Voting, like the League of Women Voters in your local election offices. Like subscribe to their updates, keep up with the latest facts. I think that's really important. So basically, just get involved, get informed, and give support to the people who make democracy work in your community every day.
I love that. Um, we've gotten a couple questions about a bit more uh, about the actual validity of if the midterm elections could be tampered with, and if the federal government, is planning to control the midterm elections. I think Pam, this might be a good one for you. What are there any specific efforts that individuals, perhaps, election officials, if you can talk more about what folks are doing now to counter these ongoing efforts of the administration to steal or interfere with the midterms? This is a question from somebody who is on.
Yeah, look, election officials are are people who if they can deal with the burnout, which is real, are people who never say never, right? They figure out a way when there's no way. And in, I want to say August, possibly September, but August, I think, there were hundreds of election officials that got together to do sort of tabletop exercises, scenario planning. Other organizations, our organizations get together and do that kind of scenario planning. We try and figure out like all of the things that could possibly happen and have ways to try and address those. And we might miss some, but we know some of the things are important that are important from all of our work. Protect against dirty tricks, as one of the commenters said. Um, get information that's valid out there. Get people directed to the trusted local information that they need. Um, there are things that we can do to safeguard our elections that us in the room here, all of us can do. Because we don't know what conditions will be on the ground in the states and cities come election day, voting early is a critically important way to ensure that voting gets spread out over multiple days and not just concentrated in one high-risk day. And that can help take the pressure off for a variety of the kinds of threats that could occur. Um, I think protecting your own vote start to finish, check your registration first. If you think you're registered, make sure it's up to date and correct. If it isn't, immediately contact your local election official to correct it. It could be a simple paperwork error or glitch, but if it wasn't, you letting them know is crucially important. It's canary in the coal mine. If you're not registered and you moved recently and need to update, you can use those same tools to start that process. In many places, there are registration deadlines in the run up to an election, so be sure you've checked those to know you can participate. Um, Checking your ballot to make sure it says what you want it to is really crucial. We ran a check your ballot campaign in 3 states in 2024 and plan to do more of that in 2026. Um, and particularly in jurisdictions where machine voting is in place for all voters, your focus is on the machine and not the piece of paper that's your actual ballot and that will be used in audits and recounts. And so we urge people to shift your focus, take a look at the actual physical ballot, make sure it says what you want it to. So check your ballot campaigns are really important. And, if you're voting by mail, use the tools that are available to you to track your ballot. So you know when you're going to get it, you know when it was received back at the elections office. That's really helpful. Also, don't vote over the internet if you can help it. Some voters might think it's a good idea to vote on a mobile device or some other way over the internet. And some states allow that for some voters. No state allows it for all voters, and there's a very good reason for that. We can't safeguard the security of the vote and the privacy of the voter using those means with present day technology. And those votes can't be audited. So no one should have to vote in such an insecure way. We published a report about safer alternatives that can help. I should stop there, but I have more advice about things we can do. So I'll let you guide this, Corrie.
I appreciate it. We have a lot of really great questions. I have another one here about mail voting. And there's just a lot of information about out there about whether or not mail voting is secure. This gentleman lives in Washington State and knows that that's all they have. And, are there vulnerabilities with mail voting? How secure is it? I'm going to give this one to Debbie first.
Great. I can provide a little information and happy if other folks want to jump in. So, mail voting is a commonly and widely used practice for voting that is secure and effective. It makes voting much more accessible for folks who have limited mobility or just folks in general who may need to who may want to cast a ballot via mail. I know personally, living in Colorado right now, it gives me a lot of time to research everything on the ballot and be really thoughtful about it before I turn it in a Dropbox. So it's a service that I use and find very valuable. There's a link that I may ask to get dropped in the chat from Brennan Center that talks about mail voting accuracy and a lot of the security features that are in place that elections offices use. A lot of states require folks to request mail-in ballots, which can be a security practice. Elections offices use signature matching as part of their security and a variety of other things as well. A lot of the claims around mail voting that are currently circulating are unfounded, and it's important and accessible way for people to be able to cast a ballot.
Thanks for that. Pam, do you have anything to add there, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'm going to shout out a practice that is really helpful for voters, and some people are kind of, talking bad about it, but I think it's a really important practice, and that is if your ballot was postmarked timely, was postmarked by election day, but because of issues with the postal service or whatever, happens to arrive a day later or 2 days later or 3 days later, count that ballot, right? You can check, you can make sure that that person didn't vote twice. There are ways to do that, but that ballot should be processed and counted. There's no reason the voter should be penalized for something that went wrong at their local mail processing center. And that is a key safeguard for overseas voters and military voters who, it's hard to get it all done in the time frame. But if they've sent their ballot timely, their ballot should be respected. So I think that's a key thing. It does change the vote count, the tally, as days go on past election day, but that's okay too, because election results take time. So I think the key is that those were checked for being sent timely, and then they should be processed like any other ballot.
And just quickly to clarify, when we talk about mail voting, is that the same thing as absentee voting?
In most cases, yeah. Some people call it vote at home. Some people call it vote by mail, so you can be absentee. You can do in-person absentee voting, which is where you're not going to be there on election day, but you may be able to go to the elections office and vote in person early as an alternative. So I live on the West Coast, and we heavily do vote by mail here. But it doesn't mean we have to stick our ballot in a mailbox. We can go to a drop box. We can actually drop it off in person on election day if we want to. We can take it with us and vote in a polling place on election day if we want to. There's a variety of ways in which you can do that, and it's really all about options for voters. And I think it's so critical to know that that alleviates the pressure on in-person voting, long lines at the polling place, and so on. And it's popular in, I would say, red states and blue states with red voters and blue voters. It's just something that I think it's not going away, and a lot of people won't end up being able to participate if you don't have mail voting. It's really critical.
I'm going to take one or two more questions here. This is an interesting one, really relevant right now. What actions can mayors themselves take personally to safeguard elections?
So
Debbie
city,
or
Debbie, go
Achia,
ahead.
perhaps?
Okay, I can start. And Ashia, I'd love if you have any other like local things that you want to add, but I think I really appreciated this question. One of the things that she has said a lot is trusted messengers are critical to the process, and mayors are often seen as trusted messengers in their community and can uplift what local election officials are doing to protect their elections as well as just the process, and can be really involved that way as well as disseminators of trusted information. I think they can also make very clear what the are for voters who are going to cast their ballot and what that looks like on election day, and just generally be shares of information. But Ashia, I'd love to hear from you too on this one if you feel like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. So what I think mayors can do, and again, it depends on your state. I know here we have looked into options of like we have a cyber emergency, like a state of emergency we can put for our state that can cover elections as well. But I say all that to say, part of my old life working for Secretary of State, I worked directly with Department of Homeland Security, CISA, and they were extremely instrumental in securing Michigan elections. We got so much funding from them. They helped move to .gov. They helped secure the websites of our local election officials, of the county and local election clerks. They also helped do all our testing. They would do phishing testing. They basically did all their cyber protection. They provided some endpoint device protection. All those things were free through the EIISAC, it's a mouthful, the Election Information Sharing, the Sharing and
Analysis
Analysis
Center.
Center. Thank you. No, it's a mouthful. So that used to be a free service. That was part of my job, is making sure that every clerk was signed up for this free service, because you got a bulk of free items with it that beefed up everybody's cyber, and it was really, really important, right? That is now gone. I met with a group of clerks last week, and they are really feeling the effects of that. And at the state level, they can't provide everything, especially in Michigan. We have around 1,600 clerks. So realistically, providing IT infrastructure for all of them is not feasible, right? But there is another option of the EIISAC, that is the multi-state information sharing analysis portion, that some of our clerks have had no choice but to opt in because they don't have a IT department. The lowest that can cost is $1,000. They don't have that in their budgets. A lot of them can't pay for that. So I'd say for mayors and individuals in those positions, they need to advocate for funding to protect those, to especially to protect the election infrastructure as far as the cyber portion of it. That's always threatened, and that people are always saying how the elections are going to be stolen. Um, Cyber and IT, as many of you know, has to remain updated at all times. It changes at all times. The threats change. They can come from other countries. So it just always has to be updated. So I'd say it's important for mayors to acknowledge that, look for funding in their state, make sure that the IT departments at the county levels are able to do able to basically meet the needs of the election infrastructure. And if they can't, like what we're doing now in the state of Michigan is we're trying to find that $1,000 for those clerks who can't afford it because it's that important. And we know that our state department doesn't have the funds to give $1,000 to each of them just for that. So fill in the gaps where they can of the federal resources that we're now missing because of the current administration. Try to find the gaps, fill them in so that our local election officials don't feel the hit as much so they can do their job properly.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask one more for Pam. What are the biggest funding gaps right now? And I'm also going to ask if you can elaborate more about like what are some of the biggest opportunities that we have in addition to the funding gaps that we're experiencing?
Okay. Um, I will do that. So this is, midterms are more than a year away, like Corey said, but the preparations for safeguarding elections are already and long since underway. Right now, we're working on strengthening provisions for checking election outcomes where they already exist and implementing them where they are not yet in place in a number of states. And if I could get across one thing that would, I think, be enormously helpful for folks who support this kind of work, it's that the work is ongoing. And it's not like get out the vote, which happens much closer to election time, right? The runway for this work is very long. Um, and we do have a gap. The funding environment is a little chaotic right now because folks are seeing a wide variety of needs out there, right? Not just in the kind of work we do, but in many areas, and it's hard to know what to do first. We get that. But groups like ours need general operating support to be able to do what we do and to be able to do more. Um, Off election years, and I mean no disrespect to states electing governors this year and so on. My own state has a big election happening right now about redistricting. But the odd numbered years generally produce less revenue for voting nonprofits. People get excited about election year in election year. And as we're coming into the fourth quarter, we really have to maintain full operational capacity. So much happens at the end of the year. Legislation gets pre-filed. Champions have to be identified to support a bill. We have to get all our ducks in a row. It's all urgent work that takes place for our kinds of organizations, even before election year begins. I will say we've had a generous donor who will double all gifts made to verified voting right now. So please consider supporting our work and supporting All Voting is Local. A donation this month helps us be ready and fully staffed for the coming year. We have key opportunities in a number of states to move audits to like a meaningful time frame, to make them more understandable to the public, to support election officials with laws that protect them from harm and interference and that bolster their ability to demonstrate election outcomes. We need to do that and we want to do that. So your help is needed, and I'm happy to talk to anyone individually who has questions about that.
And Debbie, from All Voting as Locals perspective, any final words, any, big opportunities that you would like to highlight?
Yeah, I knew this piece was coming and hearing the word final words. I'm like, oh, it has to be perfect. But I'm going to stick with what I was thinking for opportunities. I think it can be hard to not just be on the defensive right now as organizations, as individuals, as people in the pro-democracy space. And at All Voting is Local, we're taking those threats seriously, as we've talked about before. However, we're also deeply invested in looking toward the future and how we protect our elections that way, by making our elections and democracy better. And that requires pro-voter solutions. That's why we've produced a pro-voter agenda with a long-term affirmative vision for voting that calls on state and local election officials to use the broad authority they already have to expand access to the ballot. So that's my one pitch. I think the one other thing I want to quickly add is it's National Voter Education Week. So if you want to do something this week, you can celebrate National Voter Education Week by checking your voter registration or sharing more information with other folks. You can do this year round, but now there's like a movement behind it if you want to be part of it. So, yeah.
And Pam, any final words?
I do. I want to say thank you to everyone who is here because it means you're interested and you care about this issue. And, you know, be a poll worker if you can. There was a great comment from a participant about how much you could learn just from doing the training for this. And then that really exceptional direct experience on election day is like nothing else. If you can't be a poll worker, be an observer or a monitor at the polls and at your election office. If you can't do either of those things, and even if you can, also please be a cheerleader for election workers everywhere. They need the support, and they need to know that we believe in elections as much as they do. So, big shout out and thank you.
Well, and thank you, oh my gosh, to Debbie, Ashia, Pam, Megan. I really appreciate your time today. For folks who are joining us here or folks that might be watching the recording later, if we didn't get to your question, we will reach out to you directly. And if you have a question later, my email is in the chat and look for a follow-up email from us in the coming days. And we really appreciate your support and your ongoing commitment to our election. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thank you again.